My name is Iboya Glancz. I was one of 7 children of my parents. We were a practicing Jewish family and very united also. I went to a Jewish high school. I wasn't very happy at school because Orthodox Jews, practicing Jews, they don't think that girls can understand any spiritual aspect of our faith. So we had a religious lesson every day, but we were only told how to keep a kosher household and the festivals, and only the nice stories of the Bible. Actually, afterwards I found that even when I joined the convent, the church didn't want girls to read the whole Bible. So we weren't given the whole Bible. We were just given what was titled Bible Beautiful. All the nice stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, maybe King David, and a few like that. I was very unhappy that I can't read the whole Bible. Why can't I read it? And I was more shocked when I found that in my novitiate in the congregation, at that time, I joined them in 1941. We also were not allowed to read the whole Bible by order of the church. However, and luckily it has changed from Vatican II. My father was a wine producer. He had a vineyard and he used to produce wine, a very special wine that he exported to France, actually. But on festivals, he was cantor of his synagogue. He had a very good voice. And I remember can I use an expression, Shabbat, it is, in Hebrew it's called like that. In English it's called Sabbath. Our meals were like a religious service. The grace before meals on Shabbat was quite long. It would last a quarter of an hour, just the grace. To remember the creation, and what God did for humanity. And on festivals, in between courses, we sang psalms set to music. And my father, having a good voice, really we enjoyed those sessions, of meals. Not so much the meals as the spiritual aspect. Also, my father used to always invite on Shabbat or festivals young men who had no relations, was just studying, and they wouldn't have a meal like that, a family meal, which they would miss. So we always had visitors on these occasions. I never understood why we weren't liked by Christians as a child. It bothered me a great deal. but I couldn't get the right explanation. I did so as a Christian, of course. I studied Jewish and Christian history and how they were treated during 2,000 years. I'm sure you have lots of knowledge about that. And that influenced my whole life. You know, that something must be done about it. I followed a course in Jerusalem when I was a sister, and that taught me a great deal about the first century Judaism and the priests in the temple. But that's for later on. I had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and I was right in the middle. My 2 sisters got married, and you know the story. The eldest got married and went to live in Germany. I think she must have got married about 1930 to an engineer, and he lived in Germany. When the Nazis came into power, they managed to escape to Italy in the beginning of 1939. I think it was miraculous because by that time the situation was very, very bad. The second one got married in 1933 to a Hungarian young man who had the business of a fleet of taxis and a shop for parts of cars. And he was quite well to do. Unfortunately, he was deported and never returned. You know, in between, before she married, my conversion took place. I did mention, in that, I didn't mention the details, but I read a book before that event about nuns. I didn't realize at the time that it referred to the Middle Ages, how they took the discipline and fasted and got up at night to pray and all that, which is no longer the case in any congregation, I don't think. So that was my opinion of nuns. And while my sister was explaining the work she was going to have done, I didn't want to listen to all the details. I stayed in the corridor. All of a sudden, a young nun came along, smiling and asking me what I was doing there. So I explained. And I was struck by how peaceful and happy she was. And it puzzled me. And I asked her, how can you be so happy when your life is so hard? Well, she actually first remarked, what do you know about our lives? She didn't know anything about me, what religion I came from. So she said, well, if you knew Jesus, you would be happy too. And I wasn't unhappy, but I was more puzzled and asked her, Didn't he die nearly 2,000 years ago? How can you get to know a person who is no longer alive? She said, oh, he is very much alive. I assure you of that. I said, well, how can you get to know him? I became more and more curious. So she said, well, you have to read his life and what he said. And where do you find it? I had no idea. We were not allowed to pronounce the name of Jesus at home, sadly. To us, he was a Gentile God. That's all the idea we were given, at school especially. So she said, well, to tell you the truth, I can't tell you where you can buy it because we never go out. Those were very enclosed nuns. But if you really want to read it, I could lend you my copy. But I want to have it back fairly quickly because I read from it every day. So I promised her that I would like to borrow it and will give it to her as soon as I read it. So she said, if you read it attentively, he will speak to you. Oh, I was out of myself. If somebody who died 2,000 years ago will speak to me. Well, I read it that night. I didn't say a word to my sister about it. And when I finished, I felt I must tell somebody. And I knew my mother was a really profoundly religious woman. And in the morning, I said to her, do you know, Mom, that the Messiah has come and we didn't know it? My mother was stopped for a minute and said, where on earth do you get this from? I said, from a book. What book? I think it was, the title was The Four Gospels only. A very small book. My mother had such a shock that I read that book. She had to lie down. She was very unwell. A few hours after, my father decided we must call the doctor. And I had a shock myself. I didn't realize this would be the effect on her. So I never said a word more about it. They sent me to Germany, where my mother's brother lived. And that was in 1933, just after my sister's wedding. And there again, I never talked to my uncle about it. You know, I learned German at school, and my uncle only spoke German. Maybe a few words Hungarian, but they were originating from a part of Hungary that became the Czechoslovakia. Since the Second World War, it became Slovakia. Anyway, I was in Germany. There was a big place, and Hitler was going to give a talk. And there were lots of soldiers lined up, and lots of people gathered to hear him. They erected a platform. And I was just so far from the platform as that desk. I was standing there. But I didn't realize, you know, I didn't read the newspapers at that age, you know. So everybody, when he appeared, everybody put their hands up, Heil Hitler. I didn't. And somehow nobody noticed it. Anyhow, that is was an episode, how the situation was. After 6 months, my uncle wrote to my mother that it's quite safe to have me home because I must have forgotten all about it. It must have been just a teenage fancy. So I got home. I had to go back to school. I missed a bit of schooling. And actually my first journey was to the convent to ask this sister, whose name was Sister Antonia, and ask her to help me to become the disciple of Jesus. So she gave me some instructions. I used to go and see her whenever I could escape. And when I finished her instructions, you know, the minimum before somebody is accepted for baptism. And they were very sad questions at that time. She asked their chaplain whether he would baptize me. He absolutely refused. Well, she comes from a family that nobody is a Catholic, she will surely not keep it up. Well, the sister knew that I would keep it up, but anyway, it couldn't be done. Then she told me that next time I came to see her, that the bishop was coming to make a visitation of their house, their community. And she said, speak to the bishop and let's see what he says. So the bishop was very kindly disposed, and he found that my faith was genuine, that I knew enough to be baptized. So the date of, he himself will speak to the chaplain to ask him to baptize me at his risk. So my baptism was set for the 2nd of July, which at that time was the feast of the Visitation of Our Lady to Elizabeth. And we said to her, my sister was the only person I could confide this secret. And we were not only sisters, but we really were friends. We discussed everything between us. And we said to our mother that day that we are going swimming in the Danube. And we prepared our swimming costume, and my mother prepared us sandwiches, and we went to the convent. We had to cross the river of the Danube. So I think that God may have given us to have not said the full truth to her. I was baptized before Mass, and I made my first communion during Mass. And the priest gave a sermon. It was a Sunday, and he talked about if you say to your brother or sister, you are a fool, you're sure to go to hellfire. So on the way home, she was quite humorous at times and said things very funny and stupid. and she said something of that kind. I don't remember the exact date, but she stopped me and she said, "What kind of a Christian are you? You call me a fool, you want me to go to..." She understood the sermon better than I, because I was a bit excited. And but she didn't share my convictions, and unfortunately she was deported and never came back. But I'm sure that God has received her. And my little brother, it was the same with him. He was only 16 when he was deported, and we never saw him again. My sister met somebody who saw him in Poland, in northern Poland, called a place called Grabov. They were marching. It was in 1945 when the Allies came to liberate the camps and to go the opposite direction so that they won't be found by the Nazis. And he was made to march. Well, I read stories, terrible stories, about groups being marched for days on end without food or drink. And they wanted them to die off like that until the end of their strength. It must have happened to my little brother as well. He never turned up again. When I was in Israel, I met a woman who was a friend of my sister, I discovered. And they were deported together. Went for a walk, and they didn't realize that the Nazis had invaded Hungary in 1944. And they didn't realize they come. You know, the people, especially young people who don't read everything in the newspaper, and I don't suppose it was even written there that the Nazis invaded. They just came, or it surprised people. They were going for a walk, and all of a sudden, and they see an SS soldier, and he stopped them and asked straight off, "Are you Jewish?" And apparently this woman told me that she answered him, "Of course I am, and I'm very proud of it." So of course they were both deported together. And when they were in the camp, of course they gave them a starvation diet. And when there was a roll call, 5 o'clock in the morning, my sister couldn't stand up, so two other women, herself and another woman, held her by the arm and made her walk to the roll call. But then she was, her friend was